Hey guys, and welcome to the second episode in a new video series presented by KupoCon, where I'll be exploring the Final Fantasy VII compilation lore and Easter eggs that appear in the remake. I'm Gallagher, author of the unofficial Final Fantasy VII Novelisation, the standalone novel The Nibelheim Incident, which is now an audio series also produced by KupoCon, and the forthcoming book Norse Myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII. The purpose of these videos is to discuss a lot of the details hidden within the remake and to provide a broader understanding for casual and veteran fans alike. In the last episode I dissected the opening chapter of the game, the destruction of Mako Reactor 1. This time around I'll be breaking down chapter 2, titled Fateful Encounters. The video will inherently include spoilers, but anything beyond chapter 2 is minimal and mainly speculation. However, if you're not familiar with the original story, there will very likely be heavy spoilers. Before I begin, there were a couple of points raised in the previous episode that I'd like to elaborate on. The first relates to the enemy intel function. I mentioned that the bios of opponents such as the security officers or shock troopers revealed that Heidegger's Department of Public Safety Maintenance had changed its name to the Public Security Corps. There's actually a bit more to this than meets the eye. During the events of Crisis Core, Heidegger takes over the soldier department from the traitorous Director Lizard, while preserving his role as the head of the security division. The eventual amalgamation of these, as well as the Turks, is what comes to be known as Public Safety Maintenance, a euphemism for military. I also wanted to wait until now to touch on the new, or retro if you would like to call it that, design of the Buster Sword, given its indirect connection to Aerith. We've known since the remake's reveal teaser in 2015 that they would be going with a hilt that matched the plated steel and bolts from the original game. This was later changed in Advent Children and Crisis Core to be a hilt with gilded carvings. From both a practical and plot perspective though, it makes perfect sense that Cloud would disguise that part of the blade, assuming of course it has been disguised. He claims to have a history with the weapon and soldier, and could thus be easily identified by Shinra, but it would also raise too many questions for Aerith when she first sees it, given her familiarity with Zack. Speaking of Zack and the Buster Sword, the remake seems to confirm a long-time theory among fans that the way Cloud carries it is a mirror image of his old friend. In the original game, Cloud would have the long edge of the blade down his right side, while Crisis Core showed it on Zack's left. This is something to keep in mind as the remake progresses. Anyway, moving on to chapter 2, the dialogue in the tunnel scene picks up with what I'd spoken about at the end of the last episode, specifically that Avalanche are as shocked as everyone else at the level of destruction. This is mentioned several times throughout the chapter and beyond, reinforcing the point from the original game that Jessie thinks she's miscalculated the amount of explosive material in the bomb. Getting to play through this section for the first time was truly breathtaking, and it was cool to immediately notice a few differences from the early gameplay trailer in late 2015. In particular, the colour scheme is a lot lighter in the finished version. The obstacles Cloud has to navigate in the crumbling tunnel are slightly rearranged. There's much more damage to the Sector 8 streets now, and Barrett obviously isn't involved in the battle at Fountain Plaza. After the group disbands, Jessie stops Cloud to present him with a new materia, and the tutorial on how to equip and use it. It's actually healing materia, which is the remake's equivalent of Restore materia. As it happens, Restore is also the first orb collected in the field in the original game, just before the bomb is planted at the Mako Reactor 1 core. What I really love about this chapter is that the player gets to explore a lot more of downtown Sector 8. This area has appeared several times across the compilation. Sections of it are known to be business and arts districts in Crisis Core, while the opening scenes of Before Crisis reveal that the streets of the residential quarter are patrolled by new recruits to the Turks as part of their induction. More curiously, Before Crisis elaborates that these homes belong to Shinra employees. The involvement of the Turks would therefore suggest they are high-ranking personnel. The business, arts and residential districts are all visited in this chapter. What some veterans may not have spotted, however, is that the fork in the road that Cloud descends onto is the junction between Station Avenue and Loveless Street. Now, you didn't mishear me there. This is actually a bit of a naming retcon. In Crisis Core, the street where the playhouse is located is Loveless Avenue. It's the same boulevard where Aerith emerges from the alleyway in both the original and Remake's openings. Similarly, it is this exact street where Cloud and Aerith first meet. What's interesting here is that in the old game, Cloud follows Avalanche around the fire escape and arrives outside the theatre in the next screen. In the remake, however, the route onto Loveless Street is blocked off by burning vehicles. Had they not been present, the player would have been able to run directly to Aerith, just as you do in the original. At the same junction, there's also a signpost that reveals the naming scheme for the sector. It's broken down into numbered districts, and many of the streets are simply named after these. This reflects the schemes used in several metropolises in the real world, such as New York City or Tokyo, where Square Enix are of course based. Additionally, you'll see directions to City Hall. This building has never been identified before, but it's actually the one whose clock tower overlooks Fountain Plaza. Even a brief wander around Station Avenue really shows how the remake has brought Midgar to life in ways we could only have dreamed of before, especially through the use of NPC dialogue. What I thought was particularly cool here is that we get to see Shinra Emergency Services. In the original game, the battle designs for various enemies from the Shinra military confirmed that they share very similar aesthetics in terms of armour and a helmet, but the colours of their uniforms were different. For example, MPs have blue attire, captains have red, grenadiers have beige, and so on. The same design has now been attached to emergency service personnel, whose uniforms are bright orange. A scene which I'm sure caught everybody by surprise was Sephiroth's appearance after the expressway collapses. I always found it weird how Cloud's mental health plays quite a significant role in the original, but there's one thing about it that was bypassed. Given what happens to him at Nibelheim, you would expect him to have a fear of fire, particularly in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder, which causes disabling anxiety. I've addressed this a little bit in my novelisation, so I was delighted that the remake takes the recognition of it to the next level. In clinical terms, the flames in the buildings have triggered Cloud's PTSD, leaving him in a state of hyperarousal, and re-experiencing the emotions he had at Nibelheim, namely panic and anxiety. His hallucination of the town's buildings, however, is linked but separate. These are symptoms of psychosis. I think the game has done an amazing job of capturing the disorientation and confusion that Cloud feels here. What I'm eager to learn is how much of this turns out to be Cloud's mental health issues, and how much is him genuinely being manipulated by Sephiroth. In the passageway, he asks Sephiroth how his former captain could be present given that he killed him. This is a pretty big deviation from the original, as it isn't revealed how Sephiroth died until much later in the game. When Cloud first recounts the Nibelheim incident to his comrades at the inn in Calm, the story ends with him challenging Sephiroth, but having no clue what happened after that. All they have to go on are the official reports that Sephiroth was killed in action. Conversely, I've seen a lot of people complaining that the creators have retconned how Cloud's mother died. In one of Cloud's flashbacks here, he sees his home alight, and Sephiroth's voiceover talks about how she begged him to spare her son's life before her flesh yielded to the steel of the Masamune. However, in the original game, while it can be agreed that Cloud's mother died as a result of Sephiroth's actions, it's never really confirmed if this was by his sword or by the fire. When Cloud arrives at his home in the calm version of the story, it's already an inferno, and many other townspeople lie slain in the square. In the livestream version, Cloud simply wakes up outside his house to the same scene. Therefore, the sequence in Chapter 2 of the remake provides clarity on the manner of his mother's death, rather than retconning it. And finally, when things return to the present, the music that plays in the background is a sombre version of the opening track to Advent Children, titled The Promised Land. On Loveless Street itself, there are a few things to point out in comparison to the original game. Not only do we have the Loveless Theatre, it's now accompanied by the Loveless Grand Hotel. One of the NPCs also asks if the mayor could be behind the bombing as a way of tarnishing President Shinra's name. This, of course, is a reference to Domino and his hatred of the company. What may not have been spotted by many players is that all the vehicles that can be seen, both civilian and military, have registrations that start with the letters SHR, an obvious shorthand for Shinra, suggesting that all of these are company cars. The styles of the civilian vehicles are consistent with what we saw in the original game and Crisis Core, with an old-fashioned 1940s and 50s look. This ties in with the Beaufort car advertisements you see around the streets. The name is perhaps derived from a real-world company called Beaufort, who manufacture parts to build customisable vintage automobiles. We also see that Goblin's Bar, which appears in both the opening sequence of the old game and in Crisis Core's Loveless Avenue, has been replaced by the Costa del Sol Cafe and Bar, named for the famous seaside resort on the western continent. Robson's, the store or eatery that was previously beneath the theatre's main billboard, is now called Robson Cafe, and is located on the opposite corner. The billboard itself is now on the corner of Hotel Edge. As well as the Mr. Edge barbershop on Station Avenue, this is the second time we've seen the word in Chapter 2. In terms of Midgar's cityscape, Edge is used to describe the boundary between the plate's sectors. However, Edge is also the name of the town that is later built on the periphery of Midgar's ruins, first appearing in Advent Children. Like in Chapter 1, there are plenty of Easter eggs dotted around for eagle-eyed fans in the posters and signs on the walls. The most apparent of these are the Chocobos, but you'll also find one for Velvet Voix, an advertisement accompanying Loveless in the original game. And another for the Mad Malboras, named for a monster that has been a regular of the Final Fantasy series. Additionally, if you venture to the gateway at the end of Aerith's Alley, you'll catch a glimpse of what may or may not be the Huntsman, giving commands to his squadron before they set off in search of Cloud. Speaking of Aerith, when we first encounter her, she's struggling against an invisible tormentor. As our hero watches, Sephiroth touches her shoulder and causes Cloud to have one of his disorientating moments. Aerith then strikes up a conversation with him and offers him a flower. If you accept it, Cloud will ask how much he owes her. Aerith responds by saying it depends on the customer, then tells him he can have it on the house, citing that lovers used to give them to each other when they were reunited. As simple as this line is, it actually contains layers of references. First of all, one of the most hotly debated topics in video game fandom is the so-called love triangle between Cloud, Aerith and Tifa. To see Cloud and Aerith together in this moment is a subtle but beautiful acknowledgement of their relationship in the original, and how they have now been reunited. Further to this, the Ultimania Omega reveals that in an early version of the old game's script, Aerith and Sephiroth were part of a subplot about unrequited love. Sephiroth would supposedly come and buy flowers from her on the plate, but would never reciprocate her romantic feelings towards him. Therefore, his appearance in this scene has a lot more depth to it. Among the discarded texts, there's also a comment from Aerith that she charged men different amounts depending on how much she liked them. This too ties in with the quote about giving Cloud the flower for free. Further down the street towards Fountain Plaza, you can also see signs outside a building advertising Shinra Oil. This is curious as the corporation is best known for its processing of Mako, but here we get an introduction to their investment in other natural energy resources. That said, it's not actually new to the compilation. During Advent Children, we learn that Barrett, himself from a coal mining town, has been off investigating oil as an alternative to Mako. This is further explained during his chapter in the official novella On the Way to a Smile, where it's noted a small oil refinery was built several years before on a landmass east of Rocket Town. It's also mentioned that Shinra operated their own underwater wells and facilities because they believed the value of the various refined fuels would one day be realised. This is why the signs for Shinra oil exist in the remake. Fountain Plaza itself is absolutely stunning. We obviously see an overhead backdrop in the original game and get to explore a basic scaled down version in Crisis Core, but this is glorious, though the fountain at its centre unfortunately gets destroyed during the battle here. Like I mentioned earlier, the clock tower, which has appeared so often in the various compilation entries, has now been confirmed to be part of City Hall. Something I also found intriguing was all the floral carvings you can see around. There's even an artificial flower shop. It's almost as if the development team were trying to stress the theme of flowers in this chapter. As Cloud fights his way through Sector 8, he is pursued by a military helicopter. This is a B-09 model, which first appeared in Advent Children and returned in Crisis Core. It differs significantly from the B1 Alpha and B1 Beta crafts, whose designs seem to have been completely abandoned. Later, on the street overlooking the railway line, one of the security officers pauses when he apparently recognises Cloud. This is a cool piece of misdirection aimed at new players. Cloud claims to be an ex-soldier first class who, as we know from Crisis Core, have a certain degree of celebrity status in the military. The misdirection here is that it's hinted the trooper is aware of Cloud's past in the army, which of course becomes one of the story's big mysteries. However, some European translations of the game are explicit that it's the Buster Sword he recognises. Given the number of Security Division personnel Zack encounters during Crisis Core, this makes far more sense. Something I personally always found a bit off in the original is why the trains would still be running after a terrorist attack, especially when there's a very real possibility of structures being compromised. To the writer's credit, they've addressed it in the remake. Firstly, they've brought events forward a few hours, and according to the clock tower, this chapter takes place around 11 PM at night rather than after 2 AM, as in the original. As you move through the streets of Sector 8, some NPCs query it, while others reiterate the need to get people home to the slums. Most tellingly, however, an announcement is made aboard the train to advise that an emergency schedule is now in effect, thus finding a happy medium. From the remake trailers released in 2019, we already knew President Shinra had connected Avalanche's actions to Wutai, the nation with whom the corporation went to war for 8 years. This is first mentioned in the game proper by an NPC in the freight car of the train. It's also later highlighted to be common knowledge that another branch of Avalanche previously tried to assassinate the president. As I spoke about in the previous episode, this is a reference to Before Crisis. While walking through the passenger carriage, the NPC dialogue seems to refer to a thief or inappropriate touching. These are a callback to the train journey to the Sector 5 reactor in the original game, where one of the punks steals money from Cloud, and an old man is punched by Jessie for groping her. You may also have spotted the so-called thief. She's the girl with striped stockings who tells Cloud to leave her alone, and will show up again later in the game. This is Kirie Kanan, one of the main characters from the official novel The Kids Are Alright. Like On the Way to a Smile, that story was written by Kazushige Najiba, the man responsible for the main plots of both the original Final Fantasy VII and the remake. And in the final car, we at last get to meet the Shinra middle manager, who later stands up to Barrett in the old game. This scene is an expansion on the manager's mutterings to himself and actually depicts Barrett in a softer manner, albeit still threatening as hell. A nice touch here is that the music in the background is a new version of Mark of a Traitor, the track that plays in the original during Barrett's recollection of Coral's destruction. It's perhaps also worth noting that there's a guy asleep at the end of the carriage when Cloud and Jesse investigate the 3D map, just like the corresponding scene in the old game. Well folks, this has been my recap of the compilation lore and Easter eggs from Chapter 2 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please be sure to leave a comment with any feedback or something you think I've missed. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to check out my Patreon account, where you'll find free downloads of my unofficial novelisation of Final Fantasy VII, the Nibelheim Incident, and much more. Subscribers also get access to a huge amount of original content as well, including project artwork, behind the scenes podcasts, mythology articles, etc. And be sure to look out for my new book, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII, which launches in mid-2020. But until next time, take care. I'm MJ Gallagher, in association with KupoCon, and I'll speak to you again soon.